What if I told you that right in the middle of America, in Kansas, there's a house where even adult men have been attacked by invisible forces? What if I told you that in the same state, there's a cemetery that locals believe is literally a gateway to hell? And what if I told you that people have been bitten and tortured by things they couldn't see, couldn't explain, and couldn't escape? Tonight, we're diving into the mysterious dark heart of Kansas. 3 true stories and 3 encounters that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world we live in. These aren't Hollywood scripts. These aren't fairy tales made up to scare children. These are documented, verified events. Stories witnessed by real families, investigated by paranormal researchers, and broadcast by major television networks across America. People fled their homes, ended up in hospitals, and some were never the same again. Before we begin, I want you to do something for me. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and don't look behind you. Because by the time this video ends, you'll start believing that the things we fear in the dark might actually be real. In the most remote corners of your mind, you'll find yourself wondering if something like this could actually be possible. Now we can begin our chilling story. In the small, quiet town of Atchison, Kansas, there's an ordinary-looking house. From the outside, it looks like any other American home from the turn of the century. White painted wood, a small front porch, windows facing a peaceful tree-lined street. A house where you'd picture a family having dinner, children playing happily in the yard. But this house is different. This house has a reputation that extends far beyond the borders of Kansas. This house is known as the most haunted house in all of the United States. And these aren't just scary stories, they're documented, photographed, and absolutely terrifying. This is the Sallie house, and this is its story. The house was built in the mid-1800s, during a time when America was expanding westward. Its original owner was Dr. Charles Finney. Like many doctors of that era, Dr. Finney didn't have a separate office or clinic. He conducted his practice directly from his home. The first floor served as an examination room and operating theater, while his family lived upstairs. For years, there was nothing unusual about the house. It was just an ordinary home in a Kansas town. But everything changed the day a mother came running to Dr. Finney's door, carrying her little girl in her arms. The child was screaming in pain, clutching her stomach, barely able to breathe. Dr. Finney examined the little girl. Her name was Sallie, and the doctor's diagnosis was acute appendicitis. Today, this is a routine surgery, but in the 1800s, appendicitis was a death sentence if not treated immediately. And treatment meant only one thing: emergency surgery. There was no time to lose. Every second mattered. Dr. Finney knew that if Sallie's appendix burst, she would die in agony within hours. He needed to operate immediately. He quickly prepared his surgical instruments and administered anesthesia to the little girl. But this is where the story takes a dark turn. In his desperate rush to save Sallie's life, Dr. Finney made a terrible mistake. He began cutting into the little girl before the anesthesia had fully taken effect. Sallie was still conscious. She could still feel everything. Sallie's screams echoed through the house. Blood-curdling, agonizing screams. Screams that would haunt these walls for more than a century. And then silence. Sallie's screams suddenly stopped. Her small body went limp. Her face grew pale. And just like that, she was gone. The little girl died right there on Dr. Finney's operating table. Her last moment in this world was with a man she believed was torturing her, a man she had expected to give her life back, to take away her pain. Instead, he had caused her to die in agony. But Sallie's story didn't end with her death. For years after Sally's passing, residents of the house experienced strange occurrences. Objects moved on their own, cold drafts appeared in the middle of summer. Children living in the house spoke of an invisible friend named Sallie who played with their toys. Unusual, yes. Unsettling, yes. But not dangerous. Until 1993. In the early 90s, a young couple named Tony and Deborah Pickman moved into the Sallie house. They were newlyweds expecting a baby, looking for an affordable home. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and the house had character. They had no idea what they were getting into. At first, things seemed normal enough. Their dog, who had never shown any signs of aggression, began acting strangely. It would growl at empty corners of the room. It refused to go upstairs, and it would stare for hours at the threshold of what had once been the nursery, as if watching something the Pickmans couldn't see. Then the toys started moving. The Pickmans had set up a nursery for their expected baby, filling it with stuffed animals and colorful toys, but every morning they found the toys rearranged. Stuffed animals that had been placed on shelves were found sitting in circles on the floor. Building blocks were arranged in impossible configurations, and sometimes they heard a child's giggle coming from the empty room. Deborah began to feel a strange connection with the presence in the house. She became convinced it was Sallie, the little girl who had died there more than a century ago. The spirit seemed fascinated by Deborah's pregnancy, by the new baby growing inside her. It was almost protective. But not everyone in the house received the same treatment. Tony Pickman began experiencing something far more sinister. Tony would wake up in the mornings with long red marks on his chest and stomach. They looked like scratches from claws, but there was no one in the bed except him and his wife, and Deborah's nails weren't long enough to leave such marks. Then the scratches got worse. They became deeper. They started to bleed. Tony would feel a burning sensation on his skin, and when he lifted his shirt, there would be fresh, angry red lines that looked as if they had been carved into his flesh by an invisible hand. But the physical attacks were just the beginning. One night, Tony woke up to find he couldn't move. He was paralyzed, frozen in his bed, unable to even cry out for help, and at the foot of the bed stood a figure. A woman dressed in black, with a dark veil covering her face. She was moving toward him inch by inch until her hand reached out to his face. He could now see that her hand was covered with a long black lace glove, and on her finger was a black bird. Tony fought with all his strength to move, to scream. He finally broke free from whatever force was holding him and threw himself at the bedroom door. But it wouldn't open. Something was holding it from the other side. When he finally escaped the room, gasping for breath, he found Deborah in the hallway, confused and frightened. She hadn't heard or seen anything. But the scratches on Tony's chest were real. The terror in his eyes was real. And from that moment on, the Pickman family knew that something evil lived in their house. The attacks continued. Tony was scratched, bitten, and pushed by invisible forces. Fires started spontaneously in the house with no explanation. The temperature in the operating room where Sallie had died would suddenly drop to freezing, even in the middle of summer. Electronic devices malfunctioned. Doors slammed on their own. And always there was the feeling of being watched. Paranormal investigators from across the country came to examine the Sallie house. They captured EVP recordings of a child's voice saying, "Help me." They photographed strange orbs and mists appearing from nowhere. And they confirmed what the Pickmans already knew. Something was very wrong in this house. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was this. The investigators believed Sallie wasn't alone. According to the mediums and paranormal researchers who examined the house, multiple entities resided within its walls. Little Sallie seemed relatively harmless, but there was something else in the basement, something darker. something that hated men, something that wanted to harm anyone who entered its domain. Some investigators believed this dark entity wasn't a ghost at all. They believed it was something much worse, possibly even a demon, a malevolent spirit attached to the property, feeding on the negative energy from Sallie's traumatic death. And they said this entity was responsible for the violent attacks on Tony. After more than a year of terror, the Pickman family finally couldn't take it anymore. They fled the Sallie house, leaving most of their belongings behind. They couldn't stay another night. But their nightmare didn't end when they left. Years later, both Tony and Deborah reported ongoing paranormal experiences. It was as if something from the Sallie house had followed them, refusing to let go. Deborah eventually wrote a book about their experiences, called The Sallie House Haunting, a True Story. In it, she described in horrifying detail what it was like to live with something that wanted to harm them, something they couldn't see, couldn't fight, and couldn't escape. Today, the Sallie house still stands on North 2nd Street in Atchison, Kansas. It's been featured on countless television programs, including Sightings, Unexplained Mysteries, A Haunting, and Ghost Hunters. Paranormal teams from around the world travel to Kansas to spend a night within its walls. And yes, you can actually stay there yourself. You can book an overnight stay at the Sallie house. You'll be given the keys and left alone. You'll have until sunrise to see if the legends are true. But here's the interesting part. Everyone who stays there has to sign a waiver, a legal document acknowledging that they may be physically harmed during their visit. Because whatever lives in the Sallie house doesn't just make noises or move objects, it also attacks. It causes harm. So if you ever find yourself driving through the quiet streets of Atchison, Kansas, and you happen to pass by a small white house on North 2nd Street, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't look at the windows, because something might be looking back at you. Our second story is about a place so dark, so evil, that even the Pope allegedly refused to fly over it. We're talking about a gateway to hell hidden in the middle of Kansas. Right in the middle of Kansas, between the cities of Lawrence and Topeka, there's a place so small it's almost invisible on the map. It's called Stull. The population doesn't even reach 20 people. An abandoned town with one church, a few houses, and a cemetery. If you drove through, you might pass it without even noticing. But this tiny, forgotten town is home to one of America's darkest legends. A legend that has been drawing curiosity seekers, paranormal investigators, and thrill-seeking teenagers for years. Stull Cemetery, a place said to be one of the 7 gateways to hell. Land that Satan himself allegedly visits twice a year in person. And if you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, you might not make it back. This is the story of Stull. And I'm warning you, after hearing this story, you'll never feel the same when passing by a cemetery in the dark. Stull's history dates back to the 1850s. Back then, the town was called Deer Creek. It was founded by immigrants of German and Pennsylvania Dutch descent. It was a small but functional community. People farmed, raised their livestock, and lived quiet lives. In 1867, a stone church was built on the hill above the town. It was called Evangeline Emmanuel Church, a small, modest structure. German immigrants worshipped here, held funerals, and celebrated weddings. Right next to the church, a cemetery was established. The town's dead would be laid to rest here. Years passed. The town never grew. The railroad bypassed Stull, and that sealed the town's fate. In the early 1900s, the post office closed. People slowly migrated away. In the 1920s, a new church was built, and the old stone church was abandoned. For decades, the old structure slowly decayed. Its roof collapsed. Its walls became covered in moss. The windows shattered. But the cemetery remained. The dead always remain. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. In November 1974, an article was published in the University Daily Kansan, the student newspaper of the University of Kansas. The headline was, "Legend of Devil Haunts Tiny Town." The writer, Jane Penner, compared Stull to Sleepy Hollow, America's most famous ghost town. According to the article, Stull Cemetery was no ordinary graveyard. It was one of 7 gateways to hell. And Satan himself visited this cemetery twice a year, once on Halloween and once on the spring equinox. The article was based on local legends. According to the stories, there was a staircase inside the abandoned church, not an ordinary staircase. This staircase led downward, deep into the earth, into the depths of hell. And if you found this staircase and dared to descend, you would never come back up. Because while going down might take only minutes, climbing back up could take weeks. That is, if Satan didn't catch you and drag you down. There were other legends too. It was said that even though the church had no roof, rain never fell inside. The rotting cross on the wall would turn upside down when visitors came at midnight. And an old pine tree in the cemetery had once been used as a gallows to hang witches. The spirits of these witches still wandered the cemetery, waiting for every Halloween to join Satan's army. After the article was published, Stull suddenly became famous, but not in a good way. University of Kansas students began flocking to the cemetery every Halloween and spring equinox. They wanted to see Satan. They wanted to find the gateway to hell. In the darkness of night, they wandered among the gravestones, explored the ruins of the old church, and scared each other. And strange things began to happen. Visitors claimed to experience unexplainable events at the cemetery. Their cars and cameras would malfunction. People lost track of time as if it flowed differently there. Some reported feeling a violent wind, a wind so strong it pressed them to the ground and prevented them from moving, yet the air was completely still. A group of students from Emporia State University went to the cemetery in the late 1970s to conduct paranormal research. They were recording with their equipment, but suddenly their devices stopped working. And from within the darkness, from nowhere, came a savage growling sound. The students fled in panic. They could never fully explain to anyone what they saw or heard that night. In 1980, another article was published in the Kansas City Times newspaper. This article added new details to the legend. According to the writer, Satan appeared in 2 places simultaneously every Halloween. One was Stull in Kansas. The other was a location in the desolate plains of India. From these 2 points, Satan gathered all the souls who had died violent deaths that year, and at midnight he roamed the world with these souls. As the legend grew, so did the stories. Some said that Satan had relations with a witch in Stull, and they had a child. When this child was born, it was deformed and monstrous. The ashamed mother buried the baby in the cemetery, and this cursed child's grave was directly above the gateway to hell. According to another legend, the town's mayor was murdered in the cemetery in the 1850s. A stable hand stabbed him to death. This murder cursed the land and attracted Satan's attention. Of course, historians say that Stull never had an official mayor. The town was never that big. But the most famous legend was the one about the Pope. In the early 1990s, when Pope John Paul II visited America, it was claimed that his plane changed its route. Why? Because the Pope refused to fly over Stull. The Vatican had decided that passing over this cursed land was too dangerous. This story even appeared in Time magazine. Of course, this story is completely fabricated. There's no evidence. The Vatican never made such a statement, but the legend spread, and people believed it. If even the Pope was afraid of this place, there must be something truly terrifying there, right? Celebrities were also affected by the Stull legend. Pop star Ariana Grande visited Stull with her friends in 2013. According to what she later shared, the moment she stepped into the cemetery, she felt nauseous. There was a smell of sulfur in the air, the smell of hell, and she was overcome by an indescribable negativity. Grande said that in photos taken that night, they saw strange shapes and shadows next to their faces. Guns N' Roses guitarist Slash produced a horror film called Nothing Left to Fear in 2013. What do you think was the inspiration for the film? The Stull Cemetery and the legend of the gateway to hell. What about the witnesses, people who actually saw something there? For decades, visitors to the cemetery reported strange experiences. Some said they saw a white female figure in the darkness of night. This ghost, known as the White Lady, was the spirit of a woman who died during childbirth and was buried with her baby. She carried an infant in her arms, and when you tried to approach, she melted into the air and disappeared. Others saw more frightening things. A dark figure with glowing red eyes and horns. A shape that appeared near the church ruins and vanished when you fixed your gaze upon it. Was it Satan himself? A demon? Or just a trick played by darkness and fear? Physical phenomena were also reported. Unexplainable temperature drops, sounds coming from the air, whispers, moans, electronic devices malfunctioning for no reason, and the strangest of all, lost time. People thought they had spent 10 minutes in the cemetery, but when they looked at their watches, hours had passed. But all this activity became a nightmare for the residents of Stull. Every Halloween, hundreds of people flooded the cemetery. Drunk teenagers, curious tourists, so-called paranormal investigators. They knocked over gravestones, they sprayed graffiti on the walls, they threw their trash everywhere. And worst of all, they disrespected the graves of real people's real loved ones. Stull residents pleaded, "Go have your fun somewhere else. Leave our cemetery alone." But no one listened. In 2002, the remains of the old stone church were demolished. Safety concerns were cited as the reason, but everyone knew the real cause. The church was seen as the location of the gateway to hell. By eliminating it, perhaps they could kill the legend too. It didn't work. Even after the church was demolished, people kept coming. Now there was only a pile of rubble, but even that didn't stop visitors. The sheriff's department began patrolling the cemetery every Halloween and spring equinox. Trespassers who were caught faced fines of up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in jail. Today, a large "No Trespassing" sign hangs on the gate of Stull Cemetery. Local residents immediately report suspicious vehicles to the police, and the cemetery has, ironically, become one of the most heavily guarded cemeteries in America. So what's the truth? Historians and academics say the Stull legend is completely made up. The 1974 newspaper article was probably a piece of fiction written for Halloween, but it was mistakenly perceived as real, and the legend was born. The witch-hanging tree was actually just an old pine tree. It was cut down in 1998 to discourage curiosity seekers. The place known as the Witch's Grave was probably the grave of a woman named Gertrude Stull, who died of natural causes. And the Pope story? Completely fabricated. No evidence whatsoever. But legends don't need evidence, do they? People want to believe. They want to believe that there's something out there in the dark, that the unseen exists, that hell is real. And Stull became a place where all these fears took physical form. Maybe the real horror isn't in the cemetery itself. Maybe the real horror is in what people are willing to believe, in what they think they see in the darkness, and in how they behave in the face of the unknown. But still, if you ever find yourself in the middle of Kansas, near the town of Stull, and you're there at midnight on Halloween or during the spring equinox, don't go near the cemetery. Because what if the legends are true? What if there really is a gateway there? What if Satan really does come? Some questions are asked so that their answers are never found. Our third and final story takes place at one of the oldest military forts in Kansas. There, for over 150 years, it's said that the dead are still on duty. Soldiers, priests, mothers searching for their lost children, they're all still there, still walking, still waiting. Fort Leavenworth, America's most haunted military base. And what happens there is more terrifying than any battlefield. In northeastern Kansas, on the western bank of the Missouri River, lies one of the oldest and most important military installations in American history. It's called Fort Leavenworth. Established in 1827, this fort holds the distinction of being the oldest continuously operating military post west of the Mississippi River. For nearly 200 years, this land has seen soldiers, commanders, wars, and death. But Fort Leavenworth isn't just famous for its military history. This installation is also known as the most haunted military facility in America. And the stories told here are more chilling than any battlefield. Because at Fort Leavenworth, the dead are still on duty. They're still walking, they're still standing guard, and some of them have still not found what they're looking for. Fort Leavenworth played a role in countless conflicts, from the American Civil War to World War I, from World War II to Vietnam. Thousands of soldiers passed through these gates, thousands returned, and thousands never came back. The Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery within the installation is the final resting place of more than 20,000 soldiers. For over 150 years, soldiers who lost their lives in battle, succumbed to disease, or died in accidents have been laid to rest here. Gravestones stand in rows, white and silent, stretching to the horizon. But this cemetery is not like other cemeteries, because those who lie here are not entirely at peace. Fort Leavenworth's most famous ghost is a priest known as Father Fred. In the mid-1800s, St. Ignatius Chapel was built on the post. Catholic soldiers and their families worshipped here, and the chapel's priest was a man everyone loved and respected. He prayed with soldiers, visited the wounded, and conducted funeral services for the fallen. History didn't fully record his name, but everyone called him Father Fred. On a cold winter night in 1875, a fire broke out at St. Ignatius Chapel. The flames spread rapidly, engulfing the wooden structure within seconds. As people fled in panic, Father Fred remained inside. Perhaps he was trying to save someone. Perhaps he was trying to retrieve sacred relics. Or perhaps he simply couldn't escape. When the fire was extinguished, Father Fred's body was found among the chapel ruins. He had burned beyond recognition. The chapel was rebuilt, life went on, but Father Fred never went anywhere. Ever since the new chapel opened, people began seeing strange things. Late at night, a figure would appear inside the chapel, a man wearing priest's robes, head bowed forward, standing as if in prayer. When you tried to approach, the figure would dissolve into the air, vanishing as if it had never existed. Soldiers and staff reported seeing Father Fred numerous times, sometimes walking in the chapel corridors, sometimes kneeling before the altar, sometimes as a silhouette behind the window looking outside. One night, a guard heard strange sounds coming from the chapel. When he entered, all the candles were lit, yet the chapel had been closed for hours and no one had gone inside. The guard extinguished the candles and locked the door. When he checked the next morning, the candles were burning again. Father Fred's ghost doesn't harm visitors. On the contrary, some say he's a peaceful, protective presence, as if he's still doing his duty, still watching over his chapel, still praying for his flock. But not all the ghosts at Fort Leavenworth are this peaceful. Catherine Sutler's story breaks the hearts of those who visit the fort. In the mid-1800s, Catherine came to Fort Leavenworth as a young mother. Her husband was a soldier stationed there. Together they settled into a small house and began raising their children. Life was hard, but they were happy. In those days, living in the frontier regions was dangerous. Conflicts with Native American tribes were ongoing. And one day, Catherine's greatest fear came true. Her children disappeared. The details have been lost to history. According to some accounts, the children vanished while playing. According to others, they were taken during a raid. But the result was the same. Catherine's children were never found again. The mother was devastated. For days, weeks, months, she searched for her children. She looked in every corner of the fort. She searched along the riverbanks. She didn't sleep at night and spent her days searching. She wanted only one thing: to find her children. But she never did. Catherine Sutler died of grief. Heartbroken, her soul shattered, she departed this world without knowing what had happened to her children. But not even death could stop her. Since that day, Catherine's ghost has been seen at Fort Leavenworth, a woman in a white dress with a pale face and tearful eyes. She wanders among the fort's old buildings, she stands in front of old houses, and she always does the same thing. She searches for her children. Soldiers have seen her during night patrols, a figure peering through windows, knocking on doors, gliding through corridors. Sometimes whispers are heard, like a woman calling for her children, sometimes crying, heart-wrenching sobs. An officer recounted an experience he had in the 1990s. Late one night, while staying in one of the old officer quarters, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, no one was there, but in the hallway, a few meters away, stood a woman in a white dress. She looked at him, her eyes filled with bottomless sorrow, and then whispered, "Have you seen my children?" Before the officer could answer, the woman vanished. She dissolved into the air as if she had never existed. The next day, the officer did some research and learned the story of Catherine Sutler. He realized that the woman he had seen that night was the ghost of a mother who had been searching for her children for 150 years. Another famous ghost at Fort Leavenworth is an unidentified soldier. In certain areas of the installation, particularly near the old barracks and warehouses, sightings of an American Civil War soldier have been reported. Whether he wears a Confederate or Union uniform varies depending on the account, but he always does the same thing. He stands guard. In the darkness of night, a figure standing rigidly in front of buildings, rifle in hand, eyes on the horizon, as if expecting an enemy attack. When you try to approach, he remains motionless, but the moment you look away, even for an instant, he vanishes. Some modern soldiers have recounted encountering this ghost sentry. One said he saw a figure in front of an old warehouse while on a night run. The figure looked so realistic that the soldier initially thought it was a military exercise, but the figure's uniform was old, very old, and it had no face, just shadow. The soldier shouted, tried to call out to the figure. No answer came, and in a blink of an eye, the figure was no longer there. The paranormal activity at Fort Leavenworth isn't just visual, there are sounds too. In the basements of old buildings, unexplained noises are heard, the rattling of chains, footsteps, moans, as if someone is still held there, as if someone is still trying to escape. Throughout history, Fort Leavenworth was also used as a prison. War criminals, deserters, and rebels were held here, and some of these prisoners lost their lives here. Some were executed, some died from torture, and perhaps their spirits are still imprisoned here. A maintenance worker recounted what he experienced while working in a basement. He was alone, repairing old pipes. Suddenly, he felt a breath behind him. When he turned around, no one was there, but the breathing continued, a warm, moist breath, as if someone was blowing directly on the back of his neck. The worker fled in panic and never went down to that basement again. The hospital building on the installation is also one of the areas with intense paranormal activity. Think about it. For over 150 years, wounded soldiers were treated in these buildings. Some recovered, but most of them never made it out alive. Battle wounds, diseases, infections. In the days before modern medicine, hospitals were often houses of death. The men's restroom on the first floor of the old hospital building is always 15 to 20 degrees colder than the rest of the building. There's no technical explanation. The heating system works properly, but that restroom is ice cold even in the middle of summer. Staff report experiencing strange feelings there. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of unseen eyes upon you. And sometimes, in the mirror, a shape behind your shoulder. When you turn around, there's nothing, but when you look in the mirror again, the shape is still there. The basement of the hospital building was once used as a morgue, and what happens there unnerves even the most experienced soldiers. Bloody footprints on the walls and ceiling have been reported, human footprints, as if someone with bloody feet had walked on the walls and ceiling. Impossible, right? Impossible according to human physics. But the prints were there. They were photographed, and then one night they disappeared without a trace. One of the most disturbing stories from Fort Leavenworth comes from an unexpected source. Children. Children of military families living on the installation began talking about invisible friends, playmates, friends that only they could see. At first, families attributed this to childhood imagination, but then details began to emerge. A little girl told her mother she was playing with children in old-fashioned clothes. When she described what the children were wearing, she described garments from the 1800s, clothes she had never seen or known about before. A young boy said the sad soldier came to his room every night. The soldier never said anything, he just watched, and then he would look out the window and disappear. When the child described the soldier's face, he said half of it was burned. Families became disturbed, some requested transfers from the post, but most stayed, because wherever they went, Fort Leavenworth's history went with them. Today, Fort Leavenworth is still an active military installation. Thousands of soldiers and their families live, work, and train here, and the ghosts are still here too. Every year, dozens of paranormal reports come from personnel serving at the post. Figures seen, sounds heard, unexplainable events. The Army doesn't officially take these reports seriously, but unofficially, everyone knows. Fort Leavenworth is haunted, and everyone who serves here, sooner or later, comes face to face with it. Some believe these ghosts are restless spirits, souls with unfinished business, bound to this world, remaining because they cannot leave. Father Fred still watches over his flock. Catherine still searches for her children. Soldiers still stand guard. Others suggested darker explanation. A place where so much death and so much suffering occurred may simply be cursed. Perhaps the ground has not forgotten the blood spilled upon it. Perhaps some places can never escape their past. Which is true? We cannot know, but we do know this. If you ever visit Fort Leavenworth, don't wander alone in the darkness of night. Don't enter old buildings by yourself. And if you feel a breath behind you, hear a whisper, or see a shadow, don't turn around. Some things are meant not to be seen. And the dead at Fort Leavenworth don't like being disturbed. And so we've told 3 stories from the dark heart of Kansas. The Sallie house, a home cursed by the agonizing death of a little girl, one that physically attacks those who live inside. Stull cemetery, according to legend, one of the 7 gateways to hell, a graveyard that Satan himself allegedly visits twice a year. And Fort Leavenworth, a military installation that has witnessed countless deaths throughout its 200-year history, where the dead still walk the corridors. Are these stories real, legend, products of imagination? You decide. But don't forget one thing. Every legend has a beginning, every horror story has a kernel of truth, and sometimes, just sometimes, the shadows we see in the dark might actually be there. If this video gave you chills, if you wanted to turn on the lights, if you looked behind you, then I've done my job right. If you enjoyed these terrifying stories from Kansas, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true horror stories from other states. I upload new content every week, and who knows, maybe the next video will be from your state. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which story scared you the most, because your comments shape the next video.